Okay, so next I want to introduce our distinguished speaker today, Dr. John Foley. John's a world-renowned environmental scientist, sustainability expert, and author. And as you're about to hear, he's a truly gifted communicator of science. His work focuses on understanding our changing planet. He's made major contributions to our understanding of global ecosystems, food security, climate change, and the sustainability of the world's resources. John's scientific publications place him among the top 1% of the most cited scientists on the planet. John truly is a public intellectual. In fact, I really admire the brave step that he made of leaving academia and going out into more public-facing organizations. So he's widely sought as an advisor to governments, foundations, nonprofits, and businesses around the world. A noted science communicator, his presentations have been featured at hundreds of international venues, including the Aspen Institute, the World Bank, National Geographic, and I could go on and on. You may have heard him on NPR or PBS NewsHour or the BBC or CNN, or read his articles in the New York Times, Washington Post, National Geographic, and many other places. You've even been in a couple of documentaries. Yeah. The HBO documentary, Too Hot Not to Handle, which I think is related to your talk, and also the film series, Let Science Speak. So he also has won an impressive list of awards for insiders, things like the Ecological Society of America's Sustainability Science Award, the Heinz Award for the Environment, and several others. But I want to particularly mention that he also is a Aldo Leopold Leadership Fellow. And Aldo's not here today, but Charlie and Karen's son was named after Aldo Leopold. In 2018, so just last year, John became the executive director of Project Drawdown. We're going to learn more about that. But Drawdown is the world's leading nonprofit dedicated to deploying science-based climate solutions. Before joining Drawdown, John had a number of environmental science and sustainability positions, including at the University of Wisconsin, University of Minnesota, and most recently at our own California Academy of Sciences, where he was executive director. So please join me in welcoming my friend and colleague, John Foley.
Well, thank you very much for having me here today. I'm going to just wander around. I'm a compulsive podium avoider, so I'll just be wandering around a little bit. It's a little more personal, right? I always feel it's like a bulletproof shield or something. I just don't know. So today I wanted to, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me up here today. Davis really is one of the world's leading meccas of thinking about sustainability, in particular thinking about as it connects to food and agriculture and the environment of which we are all a part. And so it's always a treat to be at UC Davis amongst friends and colleagues and really inspiring leaders, which we heard from today, some really great practitioners and leaders today, and honoring some incredible individuals today here and in the past. So thanks for the opportunity for that. I was asked to speak a little bit about this, some of the work that I've been doing lately, but it connects to, I think, a lot of what people here are doing too, is I'll be talking about climate change and sustainability, but it's really bigger than that. When we think about our time in history, we're living at a very different time than any other time in our species' existence. If we kind of stop and think about it and go back and find clickers that work, you remember those days? Like they were yesterday? Because they were. There we go. So if we really stop and think about it, and think about our time on the planet, one thing, so something like a human being, our ancient ancestors, something that started to look like us in the evolutionary record, kind of popped on the scene about, 6 million years ago, they tell us. So something like human beings have been walking this planet for, do the math, about 300,000 generations. Something like us was born, we lived, we died, and we moved on. And then generation after generation after generation, 300,000 times, lived on a planet like this. And on this planet, one fact was undeniably true. Earth was big. Humans were small. We could grow in our numbers. We could use up resources locally. We could cause pollution locally. And it mattered, but it didn't change the whole planet. We didn't kind of alter, Earth itself. We altered our local places. And that was basically how we got along. And we did very, very well. We became very successful as a species. But in the last 2 generations or so, all of a sudden it flipped around. Suddenly, we humans are very, very big indeed, and the Earth looks incredibly small today. So why did that happen? How did we flip from being, Earth was big, we were small, to suddenly dominating the planet and kind of running out of everything and causing this major global sustainability challenge we face today? Well, it happened quickly, and it happened for 2 basic reasons. One of which is that, there's a lot more of us today. This apparently doesn't work very well. Okay, I'll just have to stand here, I guess. So one of the things that's changed over the last couple of decades, of course, is we've got a lot more people walking the planet today. For most of human existence, we were a couple 100 million individuals on the planet at most. And we reached the first billion of us in the late 18th century, around about the time this country was founded. We got to 2 billion in the early 20th century, about 2.3 billion at the end of World War II. And we crossed 7 billion only back in 2011. And today, we're already at about 7.6. So we just lived through the most explosive growth of human population ever in Earth's history. And that happened basically in the lifetime of a lot of us in this room. It just happened, okay? So that's one thing. There are a lot more of us today than any other time ever in human history, by a lot, okay? So there are a lot more people. The other thing that happened, though, is we became more powerful. This is a picture of what Earth looks like from outer space at nighttime. If you can make it out here. This is a picture of the nighttime lights of the sky, basically. You can see the Earth's cities. So you can see here, without boundaries or any sort of legend, there's India right there. You can kind of make it out. There's Japan right there. That's South Korea right here. And right above it is apparently not North Korea. Well, that's Kim's house right there, the one with the light on. So we kind of make that out. Well, we probably shouldn't be making fun of guys with nuclear bombs, but don't put that on Twitter, okay? Anyway, so here we are. We humans have actually become so powerful as a species. Our use of energy is even visible from outer space. We can see the transformation of our world from afar, even from the surface of the moon. Our presence is obvious now to the rest of the solar system. We're here, and we're us, and we're really powerful today. And so if we think about just the last 50 years or so, we humans have changed the world in very dramatic ways, which have caused enormous pressures on our planet. If we just think about the last 50 years, for example, we can see in 50 years, the world's population more than doubled. It increased by about 2.2 times. So twice as many people than 50 years ago. The economy grew far more than that, though. It grew 8.5 times. So we got over twice as many people doing over 8 times more stuff. That's adjusted for inflation and everything. So that's huge. Twice as many people, 8 times more stuff. The use of our food consumption tripled in 50 years. We had to triple everything agriculture, which in 10,000 years got to 1969. We had to triple it in only 50 years. Huge. Our use of water basically doubled, and our use of fossil fuel energy more than tripled in only a 50-year period. Just think about that. Didn't we changed more in the last 50 years, not only than any other time in history, we changed more than the sum of all human history combined in just a 50-year period. So whether you like it or not, we're living in an inflection point in the history of our species. Everything is changing now. Even the way we're changing is changing today, right now, before our eyes. So no wonder things are kind of complicated. No wonder our old strategies for doing things in relation to the environment just don't work anymore. They worked fine for millions of years, but in the last 50, we just blew past everything, and all the rules just changed on us. So, don't beat yourself up about environmental issues too much. It really is different now than it ever was. And we have to kind of reset our expectations and how we live with our planet today because of history more than any other thing. So that's basically true. Now, okay, I am an environmental scientist. Part of my job is to depress you for the next few minutes. They won't let me keep my union card otherwise, so I have to do it as a requirement. So part of what we are doing, and we have to be honest about it, some of what we're doing to the planet is not good. We are degrading and kind of depleting key natural resources. We are changing the world in ways that in some ways are very, very negative. And we do have to acknowledge those. And if we do this unchecked, we're going to be putting a burden on future generations. They're going to live lives with a bigger mess than we inherited, and a bigger mess than our grandparents inherited, and so on and so on. And we'll talk about this more later, but I don't want to be part of the first generation in history to deliberately leave my children a degraded world. Neither do you. No one wants to do that, but we are by default heading in that direction, and we really have to take stock of that and fix it. So how are we changing our planet? Well, one way is by changing the nature of landscapes around the world, largely through agriculture, but other things too. So that's one thing that's happening. What I'm showing you here is a picture of a rainforest in Bolivia in the 1970s. So here's the Bolivian part of the Amazon basin, a rainforest in the 1970s. You can maybe make out, it's kind of hard to see, but right about here is a little dirt road right here, and there's one ranch out in the middle of the rainforest. So we got some guy out here ranching in the middle of the Bolivian Amazon, listening to the Bee Gees or something. It's 1975, right? And that's fine. It's one little ranch, but surrounded by virgin, beautiful, intact forests. Well, let's go back to exactly the same place about 28 years later, and it looks like this. So this is what it looks like basically today. All of these fields here have been cleared. The forest is essentially gone. And what we have here is mostly soybean farms. And the soybeans are mainly being sent to China, especially for animal feed, especially as China is getting wealthier and more increase in meat consumption, especially in the urban centers where people are getting wealthier. They're eating more pork. The pork got to eat something, they eat soybeans. They're coming all the way from Bolivia and the United States and Brazil and Argentina. So globalization, half a world away, a change in diet is clearing rainforest in South America coming from diets in China. That's the world we live in, and it happened really, really quickly. And if we take all of the footprint of agriculture and we go to the global scale, we can see that growing food is a pretty big deal on our planet. This is a map that my students and I produced back when I was at the University of Minnesota, and it shows basically every farm in the world using satellite data as well as ground-based censuses. The green areas are where we grow our crops, the plant-based part of the human diet, as well as the diet for a lot of our animals and sometimes our cars. So that's the corn and soybeans and stuff like that in the Midwest. It's our great vegetable and nut belt here and fruit belt in California. It's all these different things. Huge amount of area. If we put all the crops in the world in one place, it'd be the size of South America. It was huge, it'd be 16 million square kilometers, bigger than South America. The brown areas are the pastures, of course, the rangelands and pastures. That's an even larger area of the world. A lot of that was being grazed by other animals earlier, but now it's being grazed by our animals, so we've changed it a little bit. Those areas are enormous. In fact, if we put those all in one place, it'd be bigger than Africa, be about 34 million square kilometers. Huge, huge amounts of real estate in food. And if we put it together, all the food in the world uses about 35 to 40% of all the land on the planet, all the land there ever was or ever will be. And think about what's left, the areas that are not touched by ag at all. Well, they're the deserts like the Sahara, they're the rainforests like the Amazon, the Congo, and parts of Indonesia, and basically the far north, where you can't grow much. So what do we have left? Mainly rainforest, and that's why we're really concerned about those. So we've changed landscapes around the world largely for food, but cities also have a footprint. Cities on Earth cover a little less than 1% of the Earth's surface, but they're really important because half of us live in them. And a lot of our big footprints of the environment happen in cities. So those are important too. Mining is important, forest clearing is important, but the most visible thing we do to the earth probably is growing food. And so by its very nature, it can be part of the problem, but today I want to talk to you later about how it can be part of the solution to our environmental issues as well, like we heard today. Farming a little differently can make a huge difference. So that's really important. We also know, of course, here in California, that water use is a major thing we've done to the planet. I'm not going to use a California example. This is actually from Arizona, looking out the window of an airplane, seeing iceberg lettuce growing in the Arizona desert using the Colorado River to irrigate it. You might recall that Colorado doesn't enter the ocean anymore. Even before climate change becomes an issue, we literally have consumed the entire Colorado River most years to do things like this. Having lived in Minnesota, I'm kind of grateful for iceberg lettuce in the winter, but geez, that's a lot of water to use to do that. So we have to be thoughtful about how we use water and what we use it for and what other things we need water for, whether it's for nature, for our recreation, for sanitation, for industry, and for growing food. What are the services water provides us? We have to think about that very, very hard. But we Americans aren't the only people in the world to use water in ways that are pretty big and obvious. Here's what the Soviets did back in the 1970s. This is the Aral Sea in the middle of what used to be the Soviet Union. Today is Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. These are two basically desert regions of Central Asia. And there was a large sea here back in the day, very, very large, a couple 100 miles across, a big body of water in the middle of Central Asia. And it really shouldn't be here. It doesn't rain a lot here. The reason it's here is because there are two rivers that drain the water into it, one up here and one down here. Well, the Soviets actually decided to dam up those rivers, and a lot of you know this, then irrigated the Kazakh deserts mainly to grow cotton in the middle of the Soviet deserts at the time, to bring in foreign capital into the cash-strapped Soviet economy. Well, what do you think happens if you dam up the rivers to the Aral Sea? Well, that's what happens. No more Aral Sea. We've literally obliterated one of Earth's major water features to grow a little bit of cotton in Kazakhstan. One of my grad students actually years ago printed that on a t-shirt and put a little quote on it, said, we drained the Aral Sea and all we got was this lousy cotton t-shirt. And which I thought was really funny. We ended up going to a conference one where the Cotton Incorporated people were really not happy with that. I'm like, look, it wasn't your cotton, it was Soviet. Anyway, probably wasn't a good move. But anyway, we have changed the world, and to grow food and fiber and things like this, we've literally changed what Earth looks like from space. So water resources are also changing around the world too. So my point here is we started with land, we can look at water, we're changing the oceans, but also I'm going to talk about climate change, where we're talking about changing the sky. And that's really hard for people to understand sometimes for obvious reasons. We're talking about climate change and the fact we've added gases to the atmosphere called greenhouse gases. You've all heard this story before. One of those gases is CO2, and it's invisible. So you have to trust us, scientists. Like, I'm telling you a bedtime story about an invisible gas that's going up in the atmosphere that you cannot see by its very definition. Just trust me. And over the decades, it's gradually going to warm the planet. And you're like, yeah, right. I mean, no wonder people didn't believe it for a long time. But let me assure you, it's real. It has been happening. We know that this is real. In fact, we know that the greenhouse effect is happening on our planet. It's very natural that we had a greenhouse effect. We're just making it stronger and the planet warmer. By the way, a lot of you, might think this is recent science, that we figured out what the greenhouse effect and global warming was recently. Maybe Al Gore figured it out? No, sorry. It turns out the first scientist I know of who wrote about the greenhouse effect did it in the 1830s. A scientist named Joseph Fourier, a French mathematician. Also, there's a woman named Foote who wrote about it in the 1850s. A woman scientist who was absent from all the meteorology textbooks until recently, by the way. Huge omission. That needs to be corrected. So we actually seen, this is like the 1800s science coming true in the 21st century. So we're changing land, we're changing water, we're even changing the sky. And we're doing this in ways that are really pushing the planet to its limits. This is not just a local environmental issue. We're talking about changing a planet and how it works, and that touches all of us. And it will for thousands of years, reverberating down through the generations. So that's really a huge issue. One of the things you might have noticed, though, through a lot of this, and I'll make this point a little bit more deeply soon, is a lot of the sustainability challenges we talk about with respect to land or biodiversity or water or climate change, if you boil them down, a lot of these things come from three big sources of change. How we use and produce our food, how we use and produce water, and how we use and produce energy. So to, pretty good first approximation, a lot of our big global environmental challenges tie into food, water, and energy. And of course, those are intimately connected. You can't grow food without water. You can't grow food without energy. You can't have energy without food. You can't have energy without water, and so on and so on. So we often talk about this kind of nexus of food, water, and energy kind of coupling together in our society. And we need to be thinking about that pretty hard. So this is an incredible challenge. Huge, huge, huge challenge, planetary challenge we've never, ever seen before. So I should stop now. Are you a little bit bummed out yet? Should I stop now? Yeah. Okay, well, that is a challenge. But I have to, I think, to be intellectually honest, say, hey, wait, there are some challenges. They're big. Let's look them in the eye and introduce ourselves. But also, there are incredible opportunities at our point in history, too, and we should be very mindful of those and seize those. Sometimes we in the environmental science community kind of forget to talk about this. Like, some things are getting better. So let's talk about those, too. For example, the human condition on Earth is definitely improved on average. Not for everybody. Not enough in some situations. We got some work to do. But for example, in the last 50 years, our life expectancies as a planet increased dramatically. 50 years ago, the average person on Earth lived to be 55. Today, it's about 71. 50 years ago, the average woman on Earth had 5.1 children. Oh my God, on average, what was above average? Oh my gosh, Today it's about 2.4, 2.5, and falling faster than anybody ever thought. We're more literate today. 85% of the world can read. 50 years ago, it was 50%. In 1900, it was only 15%. So, we've made huge strides in literacy and education. That's fantastic. We're more urban, we're more mobile, we're more connected. I don't know if that's good or bad, but we are, one of those. And a lot of scholars would argue that fewer people today die from violence and warfare as a fraction of our population than any time in human history. So, though still too many, obviously. But what's really interesting is overall, we humans today, though not everybody and not equally enough, but on the whole, humans are living longer, healthier lives in a safer, better educated, more connected world than any of our ancestors. So a lot of people ask me, like, well, what is it? Is it, it's the Dickensian question, like, is it the best of times? Is it the worst of times? Are we watching a Mad Max movie? Or are we going to be watching a Star Trek movie? Which one is it? And so is it a time of a planetary crisis, or is it a moment of opportunity? I get that question every bloody day, and my answer is always the same. It's like, well, which one do you want? So go out and build it, because we get to decide that. The future isn't written. It's going to happen because of us. We get to decide which future we have. So go out and shape it. The best way to predict the future is to build it, right? So we need to get to decide, and let's go out and build the future we want. Don't accept anybody's scenario as a default. Don't let some expert, I don't care who it is, including me for sure, come and tell you this is what the world's going to look like in 2050. I'm like, oh yeah? I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to change it. I want to make it better. So how many want to sign up for that? Let's make a better world, right? Okay, let's make the future we want. But to do that, we have to work differently than we did for the last few million years. Remember all those generations I told you about where we could use up resources, grow our population, spread out, leave waste behind, and it was okay? We can't do that anymore. We ran out of planet. So we have to do a fundamentally different approach, and we call that approach sustainability. We've used that word all night. And I love this word. I've run whole institutions with this word. I think it's on my business card or something. This is a hugely important word in my life. I'll confess something to you, though. I bloody hate this word with a passion you cannot possibly understand. Because it sucks. I mean, if I were to ask you, like, hey, how's your marriage? So, well, it's sustainable. Like, oh, dude, that sucks. I'm so sorry. They have therapists for that. Get help, please. I'm like, that's the best we can hope for is sustainable? I'm like, oh, God, we're in big trouble if that's the best we can hope for. I'm like, why don't we use another word? Like, what I want is like, I don't know, how about like to thrive? Maybe with nature? How about a word that says like, let's thrive, and people and nature thriving together today and tomorrow. That's what we ought to be doing. That's better than sustainable, don't you think? But unfortunately, we don't have, we had scientists inventing the word, not marketing people. So this is what we ended up with. Somebody at the UN, probably a scientist, like, oh God, But isn't it weird that in the English language, and almost all Western languages, in German, the word for sustainability, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, is it Nachhaltigkeit or something like that? It's basically, loosely translated, means to pasteurize. So the Germans is like, let us boil the planet so it does not go bad in the future. I'm like, holy, I think this is bad. Now to say it in German, Whoa. Isn't it weird though, in Western language, in the origins of our language, there wasn't a concept or a word to say, we ought to be able to run a civilization without destroying it. Never occurred to anybody. Well, in a lot of other cultures, there are words and concepts like this that were ingrained in the culture, but not in Western European cultures, and that probably says something. So sustainability is what we got. We're going to stick with it for now. One of, but certainly not the only issue about sustainability in the future will be the issue of climate change. Climate change will be a defining issue in our journey for sustainability in the future, no question. It's not the only environmental issue at all, but it's going to be one that affects everything else. One of the things, like the Pentagon likes to call climate change a threat multiplier, because it kind of makes bad things worse. We already have problems with water. We already have problems with ecosystems and conservation and biodiversity. We already have problems with justice. We already have problems with sustainable agriculture, right? Climate change is going to make those kind of hard things even harder. So it touches everything. And itself is a big scary problem all by itself. So that's one of the reasons we all have to kind of think about it. So climate change is going to be a defining issue, and one of the reasons it is because of this little graph here. This shows the levels of one of our greenhouse gases, CO2, in the atmosphere, and you are here. That's us today. We're now this morning at 415.2 parts per million of CO2. That is the highest level, as of this morning, the highest level ever seen on Earth in over 3 to 5 million years, okay? And we're breaking a record right now this month. So that's not good. The highest it had ever been before is about 270 parts per million. Now we're up to 415. So if I tell you, hey, there's something bad happening and it's going up, like, okay, this is the temperature graph that goes along with it. Temperatures are also going up, okay? So what's going up? Greenhouse gases, and as a result, the heat they trap on the planet, as a result, the temperatures are going up. This is just basic physics, okay? So if I came to you and said, something bad is happening to you, like your blood pressure is too high and is going up, that's bad. You don't want it to go up anymore. So we have to stop that and think about how do we reverse this bad trend of climate change. In order to do that, we're going to need to do a few things. First of all, we're going to need solutions that can actually stop this continued rise in greenhouse gases and the resulting warming of our planet. We'll need a few other things too. We don't need just the technical solutions. We'll need more. I'll get to that later. But first we need to know what to actually do. That's what our organization does. Tom mentioned it before in his gracious introduction. I run this little nonprofit called Project Drawdown. Well, what does that word drawdown mean? Well, again, think about that blood pressure. If I came to you and I'm your doctor and said, your blood pressure is too high, and we've been tracking it and it's still going up, that's bad. You don't want to do that anymore. Let's not make a bad problem worse. What you'd like to do is take your blood pressure and lower it, or maybe your weight, or whatever it is. Something that's too high, you want to lower it. Same thing with greenhouse gases. So drawdown to us refers to the moment when greenhouse gases not only stop rising, we don't want to just stop climate change, we want to reverse it. So Project Drawdown is dedicated to the concept of stopping and ultimately reversing climate change. And everything we do is to arrive at that moment in human history where greenhouse gases peak and start to decline again, where we begin to restore the planet back to its geologic norm. Hugely ambitious. Other organizations talk about maybe slowing the rate at which we approach climate change, maybe stopping it someday. We're like, no, we want to reverse it. We're not messing around. Okay, can we get there? Short answer, yeah, and I'm going to show you how. So how to do this, though, is we have to start with the science. Now, I will not bore you to death with too much chemistry and physics, but we're talking about one of the biggest problems humanity's ever faced, and I think it's worth spending 5 minutes on the science about what to do about it. So when we do that, I just want to start with some very basic stuff. You've already heard that climate change is partly caused by CO2, right? CO2 traps heat in the atmosphere, and a lot of CO2 comes from burning fossil fuels. So I've done the math for you. It turns out that about 62% of our warming happens from burning fossil fuels. About 40% has nothing to do with fossil fuels. So if you think that stopping fossil fuels will fix climate change, you've got 60% of the answer, but not all of it, because there's other stuff. It turns out that CO2 is also released by land use, primarily agriculture. But it's like deforesting places like the Amazon and Indonesia to grow more crops and more timber, things like that. It's also plowing up soils too much, oxidizing the organic matter in the soil, letting it go into the atmosphere. We can reverse that, though, as some of you do. And other things. So land use is a big thing that puts CO2 in the atmosphere. Just like burning coal releases CO2, so does burning trees and essentially burning up our soil also releases CO2 into the air. Another thing that people kind of forget about is there's some CO2 emitted into the atmosphere from chemistry, things that we do at an industrial scale that releases CO2 in the atmosphere. So people say, oh, it's like the carbonated sodas. Like, well, yeah, that adds a little bit. You shake up your Coca-Cola, that's a tiny little sliver. But most of it actually comes from, does anybody know? Cement. Hey, wow, smart room. Okay, so cement. It turns out when Portland cement is curing into concrete, it releases a lot of CO2. If cement were a country, it'd be the third largest emitter of CO2 in the atmosphere after China and the United States. Okay, huge. And I don't know what the solution is to that yet. We have a huge problem there. We need buildings, we need roads. How are we going to need to get climate-friendly cement? It can be done possibly, but there's no industrial company doing it yet. There's only startups. Huge amount of opportunity there. But then we get into other gases. I won't worry about them too much. But there are other gases that trap heat in the atmosphere that we put in there. So there's CO2 from industry and fossil fuels, CO2 from land use, CO2 from cement, and then this gas here called methane, CH4. Now, as you know, methane is natural gas, so it comes from fracking. It comes from gas pipelines that might be leaky and leak into the atmosphere. We're going to tighten those up and do a lot better with that. It also, and I don't need to tell people in Davis this, you already know this. Every other audience, I have to explain basics of cows. I don't hear, you guys in Madison, Wisconsin, I don't need to tell you, it's fantastic, that cows fart, no, wait, they burp methane. See, we always, well, it turns out that everybody likes to joke about cows going the other end, but as you all know, because you live in Davis, cows actually burp methane, not from the other end. As much. So yeah, cow burps are a big part of this too. So are landfills, so is rice, a whole bunch of other things release methane. So ag is a part of this, but industry is a bigger part of the US. Ag's in there, but so are landfills and other things too. So a lot of different sources of methane, but methane's a very powerful greenhouse gas. We're going to tackle that too. And then we have this last one, which is primarily an agricultural gas too, is nitrous oxide from overusing, it's not always from fertilizers, but that's one of the biggest sources. It's when we overuse fertilizer and it can turn into N2O into the atmosphere. That's a big source too. The last gas here are called fluorinated gases. These are like the what used to be chlorofluorocarbons that hurt the ozone layer. They also warm the planet, turns out. We phased them out with hydrofluorocarbons that are ozone friendly, but they're not climate friendly. So we're probably gonna have to phase those out again in favor of some other chemical that doesn't trap heat in the atmosphere. I'll get back to that in a minute. So that's it on the chemistry. Sorry, just remember two things. Multiple gases, multiple sources. It's not just fossil fuels. That's the lion's share. There's a lot of other stuff there. So many gases, many sources. That's good news because it means we can if there are many sources of the problem, that means there are many sources of our solutions. So that's the chemistry. Now we're going to switch to the economics. Where did they come from? And let's trace the chemistry of those gases back down to the land and figure out where they came from. Globally, if we add up the whole planet, 25% of all the warming on the planet stems from making electricity. In California, it's about 12%, 15%, I think, in the state, something like that. But globally, it's about 25%. So electricity is about a quarter of climate change. It's tied, basically, with food and land use. Now, in the US, food and land use are much less than this. In California, even less so. So this is the global picture because that includes like the tropics. It includes deforesting the Amazon and Indonesia and all sorts of stuff that we don't do directly. So this is not, your mileage may vary depending where you are, but globally, electricity and food are basically half of climate change right there. Everything else is the other half. Transportation, though that's very big in California. This is a weird, like globally electricity is bigger than transport. In California it's flipped around. Transportation is much bigger than electricity here. But around the world, it turns out electricity, food, transport, industry, buildings, and other stuff, all thrown in the last category. So that's kind of where stuff comes from. So if that's where the problems stem from, this is where the solutions can come from. So our organization spent a couple of years with scientists around the world documenting every conceivable solution to climate change, and we picked the top 100 of them and ran kind of models. We actually analyzed all of the academic literature, all the economics, everything we could find, and statistically analyzed all of it and actually said, well, what are the solutions, how big are they, and what might they cost? And we wrote a book about it and put it out there. Strangely enough, nobody had ever done that before. So we basically wrote up a hand guide to the planet called Drawdown, which you can find on Amazon or anywhere else. And it's one of the best-selling climate books in the last 10 years. Some of the solutions to climate change that we looked at were very much expected. Things that are already in the conversation every day, like, oh, solar panels, you bet, of course, they're great. They tackle part of that electricity sector I talked about, right? So when we rank them from 1 to 100, solar panels on our rooftops of homes turned out to be about number 10 on the list of solutions. They're really good. You have them, especially in a place like Davis, put them on your roof. It's fantastic. For her, it's not just a climate solution. It's like this is the first electricity she's going to get. This is going to recharge her light at night. It's going to charge her cell phone, which she just got. This is great. This is a life changer. So it's not just a climate solution. It can be a development solution for many people around the world. And that's fantastic. We could spend maybe $500 billion putting it in and would save about $3.5 trillion later, not even counting the damages of climate change we might avoid. So that's a pretty good deal. Another solution, of course, would be things like wind turbines. This is looking at the ones out on the ocean, offshore, which get nice steady wind pretty much 24/7. Not a lot of those in the US, but hopefully there'll be more soon. This is mainly in the North Sea and off the coast of the UK. But those are pretty good. We rank that as number 22, offshore wind. Okay, great. Those are the ones you might expect. Solar panels, windmills, batteries, Teslas, you know. But some other solutions don't get as much attention, yet they're just as important, if not more so. So one of them is protecting rainforest is like in the top 10 solutions, but even protecting forest in the Americas, like just in the north, turned out to be really important because they store carbon too. That's really important. But here at UC Davis, and we're talking a lot about agriculture, it turns out our food system is really important. Of the top 20 solutions to climate change, 8 of them relate to agriculture, land use, or food. The top 2 are these. This is about our diets. It turns out we used to use the phrase a less meat-intensive diet. We learned from those marketing friends we should have talked to a long time ago. Don't tell anybody what you're taking away. Instead, tell them what you're giving them. So no, not meat less, it's plant rich now. What the heck, you know? They actually found that the Google campus, Bon Appetit does the catering for Google, they found they had like meatless Mondays and people hated it. They had this very same menu the next week and they just rebranded it Plant Rich Mondays. People loved it. Same menu. Nope, nothing changed except the name. People loved it. They're like, we're human, you know? So anyway, a plant-rich diet, we rank that as number 4. We don't know what the cost would be because it's kind of, you know, depends on the culture and how you do this economically. So obviously, you know, we're going to eat meat. People love meat. We're going to figure out how to do that. That's a good conversation. Hope we have some more about that later, whether it's grazing or feedlots or whatever, or it's beef or other animals. But a little less, maybe less food wasted, other things along the way. This would be something that could be a powerful climate lever, but you know, it's a sensitive topic. But one that's not such a big deal in terms of, it doesn't stir up as much passion and debate, is food waste. I've never met anybody from the pro-food waste lobby. Maybe they're in the audience today, I don't know, I'd love to meet you. I've never met anybody for, yay, food waste, never heard from them. But that we ranked as the number 3 solution to climate change is eliminating food waste in the world. Because 40%, 40, not 4, 40% of all the food in the world is never even eaten. That's astonishing, not just in this country, it's global, it's about 40%. It's in rich countries near the consumer, in poor countries it's often near the farmer because they couldn't get the crop to the market in the first place, so they lose the food and the income, which is a double tragedy, especially in developing countries. So we need to do a lot better here and figure out how do we close the loop. There's a huge gap between what we grow in the field and the nutrition that ends up in someone's stomach. That whole food system, it isn't just supply side, it's about how the demand works out and how we can reduce waste. Clearly we can do better around 40%. Can we cut that in half? I hope so. I think we need a green revolution in food waste is what we really need next. Yet we don't get that kind of attention to it. So diets and food waste turn out to be some of the most interesting food system solutions, but so is like regenerative agriculture, silviculture, things that include like, you know, hedgerows and things we just talked about, interplanting trees and crops together. Those also show up, and different pasturing systems, things as climate solutions, but these were the top 2 that I thought I'd share. Some other solutions that were a surprise to everybody, even people like me who thought they knew this stuff pretty well. The number 1 solution we came up with turned out to be refrigeration. Like what? Who the heck would have thought of that? Because it turns out refrigeration uses a lot of electricity. It does. It's also growing rapidly. As the world gets warmer and richer, billions of people are going to buy their first air conditioner in the next 10 to 20 years and buy their first refrigerator in the next 10 to 20 years. We have the largest growth of wealth in human history right now in places like China, India, Brazil, Indonesia, Southeast Asia, and so on. They want what we want. That's part of it. The more important part, though, is the chemicals in the coils of those refrigeration and cooling units, those F gases, those chlorofluorocarbons, hydrofluorocarbons. They're thousands of times more powerful, molecule for molecule, CO2 in trapping heat. So we need to tackle this stuff. In fact, we helped some companies send teams into West Africa to find landfills where these were being dumped from South Africa and Israel and recover the gases in those coils, making sure they didn't leak into the atmosphere. So if you are buying an extra air conditioning unit, make sure to dispose of your old unit properly. It's probably the most important thing you could do for climate change this year, is do not let the gases in old refrigerator coils just rust and get into the atmosphere. Really, really important. So that's something that hardly anybody's ever heard of. It turns out to be incredibly important. Another one that people didn't think about is helping indigenous people protect their land. Why is that a climate solution? Where's the windmill? Where's the power plant? What's going on here? Well, it turns out every single study we've ever looked at showing where a native people who depend on forest protect their forest, the forests are richer, more productive, more ecology, more biodiversity, and more carbon in them than all the surrounding forest around them. They just take better care of them because they depend on them and have for centuries or millennia. Especially in places like Brazil, where they're under attack again with a new government there. So if you want to help people and forest and climate change, this is a good place to invest, is indigenous communities protecting rainforest. It's kind of a triple win for biology, for people, and for climate. Not a bad idea. One of the great solutions to climate change is another one that talks mainly about people, like half the people on Earth. It turns out that educating girls and also access to family planning, which is number 7 in our solution set, are combined, helping young women with education, opportunity, and medicine are some of the best possible things we can do in climate change. Like, why is that? One is obvious. When women have more education and more opportunity, of course, they might delay when they have children or have fewer a little bit later in life because they're making other choices. They're living a different life than maybe their grandmothers did. Okay, without coercion, they're just living the life they want. But also women have more power over decision making in a lot of critical things that relate to climate change, especially around smallholder agriculture, the food system, food waste, water use, fuel use at home, cooking, and so on. Things that definitely relate for billions of people. Having more young women with education and opportunity is not only helping climate change and the future in so many ways, of course it helps half the planet have more opportunities. This is the ultimate kind of win-win-win solution. So the so-called girl effect is important to climate change too, and very few people talk about that. One of my colleagues, our Vice President for Communications, quotes Mary Robinson, who's the Prime Minister of Ireland, right? Prime Minister Robinson was giving a talk once where somebody referred to climate change as man-made global warming. And she's a feminist, so she got a little bristled at that, like, man-made. Then she thought about it, like, wait a minute. Actually, climate change is a man-made problem. Look at the oil companies. Look at who did all this mess. It's basically people look kind of like me, unfortunately. And so, so climate change maybe is a man-made problem, but it's going to have feminist solutions. She pointed out. I'm like, yeah, all right, okay, that's cool. I can maybe very, very uncomfortable, which is probably appropriate. But it was also like, yeah, I think you're probably right here. So it turns out that a lot of things that you didn't expect to be solutions to climate change probably are. But let's put it all together. I'm just going to save you the numbers and show. Oh wait, no, I guess I'm not. We're going to put them all together and point out if we put all the solutions together in just a graph. There's starting refrigeration, wind turbine, blah 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 blah. The green ones have to do with food and land use and things like this, and those diets here are in red. The point is, we have a lot of solutions to climate change, and we can stack them up. There's no silver bullet to climate change at all, but we have a lot of silver buckshot, okay? And if we put it together, it turns out there's very good news. The existing solutions we have right now are more than enough to stop and eventually reverse climate change. Okay? We have the solutions right here, right now. And I assure you that almost all of them are really good for us on average. Not coal miners, for example. Some people will be displaced like any change in the world, but they're overall very good for us, very good for the economy, good for our health, good for our future, and we have them today. And you're not hearing that message, I bet. So despite all this excellent news, we have the solutions. It turns out they're great for us. We don't have to do anything terrible to the world to solve climate change. In fact, most of it's going to be really good for us. We can start today. It's going to take a while, but we can totally do this. The problem is it isn't just the solutions that are between us and solving the problem. It's that you don't hear it. We got to have the solutions, and we got to change the conversation. Part of the problem with climate change is how we think about it. I don't know if you can make out this graph here. It's a little dark on the slide, and this room's a little bit bright. This shows basically a picture of how Americans believe in climate change, which is kind of a stupid question. It's kind of like asking, do you believe in gravity? Like, it doesn't matter what you believe. You're still tethered to the ground. Or you don't believe the earth is flat? Well, whatever. Or, is round, like, whatever. Doesn't matter what you believe, it's still round. But this is what Americans believe about climate change. The problem with how we scientists, and especially environmental advocacy groups, have been messaging on climate change, frankly, we've been really frustrated for a really long time. We've been trying to warn you about this since the 1800s, and then in earnest starting about the 1980s. We're like, hello, hi, this climate change thing is pretty serious. We should do something about it. Hello, remember me? I was that scientist I wrote a report last year you didn't read. Here's another report you didn't read. We kept on doing it, and people got frustrated. They got angry, and they tried fear. Let's get people's attention. What's the way to do that? Scare the bejesus out of people. That's when we did it. So when we talk about climate change using fear, we use polar bears drowning, fires, hurricanes, landslides, all this fearful imagery, right? Got your attention. And it hyperactivates this group called the alarmed group. It's about 15% of the country now. It's not only believing in climate change, they're freaked out. They're really, really alarmed. They might join Greenpeace, they're going to be protesting, they're going to be motivated. That's great, they're activists. The problem is when you activate this group, you also activate this group over here that are the people who just will never believe in climate change, ever. This is like Rush Limbaugh, President Trump. Well, actually, Trump believes in climate change. He actually has been quoted many times before he ran for office. This is just a late political stunt of his. But there are people over here, whether they believe it or they're just paid to say so. That's 7% of the country right now. Only 7% of the country says climate change is a hoax. And there's always going to be some of them. 93% either believe or kind of believe that climate change is real. 93%. We've won. The problem is we've scared you so much that this part is angry, this part will never believe, and everybody in blue is hiding under their beds. They're like, oh my God, it's true, and it's really scary. So this is what we've done, unfortunately. What we have done is again, 93% of Americans believe that climate change is real, roughly, or could believe it. But about 80% say it's a disaster and we can't possibly do anything about it, we're all screwed. That isn't helpful. If I'm your doctor and I say to you, wow, you are really sick, dude. And that's all I got. I'm out of here. Like, what? Wait a minute. Or the airline pilot gets on the microphone like, oh my God, there's a storm coming, we're all gonna die. And hangs up the microphone like, this is not helpful. I want the airline, I don't know about you, I want the pilot to get on, well folks, there's a pretty terrible storm heading our way. We're gonna try to, you know what, buckle your seatbelts. And you know what, we're gonna try to fly around it and through it, and it might be turbulent, but we've got professionals here, we're gonna try to land the plane. We'll, hang on, we'll do our best. That's what we need for climate change, not the, oh my God, we're all gonna die. Now what? So we need to change the messaging. And that's one other thing that Project Drawdown did. We didn't just do the research, we actually wrote about it in a way that nobody had really tried before. What we did is we said, we're gonna write a book without any fear in it. We're gonna talk about hope and possibility and opportunity and see if people resonate with that. We're gonna start off talking about the solutions to climate change. Nowhere in the book do we describe the problem. There's no picture of the greenhouse effect. We don't do the Al Gore slideshow or any of that. We just jump into, here are the solutions. And guess what? Even people who don't believe in climate change believe that that's a solar panel because they can see it. They're like, oh yeah, that's kind of cool. And many more people get on board when you talk about solutions than if you talk about the problem. What's the first city in the country to be 100% powered with renewable electricity? Not San Francisco, it's not Cambridge, Mass, it's not Berkeley, it's not Boulder, Colorado, it's not Davis, it's Georgetown, Texas. One of the deepest, reddest places you can imagine. And they just made sense. It created jobs and is good for the economy. Why wouldn't we do that? Yeah, So let's talk about the solutions. Don't even talk about the problems at all. Just forget it. We're on to solutions now. And talk in a hopeful, positive, hey, there's opportunity here. And also, let's stop blaming people. It isn't helpful to say, we're all gonna die and it's the Koch brothers' fault. I don't care. I wanna fix it. What are you gonna do? How can we work together? So in Drawdown, we use hope, we use solutions, and we invite collaboration, saying we can solve this, let's do it together, and it's possible, and it might be good for us. When we do that, we find a huge uptick in terms of the number of people and the kinds of people who can be part of that message. So I really implore us to change the messages as well as the science behind it. The last thing we need, though, and this is sorely lacking, but maybe we have to look elsewhere for it, is we need very bold leadership and vision. We've had this in America before. We've had people to call upon us to be the best versions of ourselves, to look beyond our time and our parochial interest and imagine a better future for our children. I've never met anybody, I don't care who you voted for, Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump or anybody in between, everyone loves their kids. Everyone believes that the next generation should live better lives than we did. If there was an 11th commandment that was never written down, that's it. That our children should live better lives than ourselves received. Everyone believes that covenant, and yet we don't call upon ourselves. Our leaders, so-called leaders, are not asking us to rise to that today. But we have. We've had leaders before who said, this is a world we should go get, a world of a dream, where maybe we could live better lives with more equality. It's a hard dream. Some of you will be uncomfortable with this for a while, but we all know it's better, and we'll eventually get better at this. Martin Luther King did not go around saying, I have a nightmare. He didn't. And yet, our political leaders today, it's not about let's come together around our dreams. It's let's tear each other apart over our nightmares. That's not leadership. That's bullying. We don't need that. I want to see this, but we're not going to see it in Washington today, I don't think, not enough. We're going to see it in rooms like this from you. We're going to see it in our cities and town halls and our farms, our schools, our neighborhoods. We're going to find it everywhere, like we've always found leadership, at the base of the pyramid, where it belongs. In America, we need this at the grassroots. We need people to stand up and be the leaders they are already and inspire the rest of us. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because I just want to make sure there's some time for questions and comments and jump to the end here. And basically say, here's my ask of you. You never give a talk without asking the audience something too. So this is what I'd like to ask you to do. One of the things I'd ask you to do is a blatant kind of connection and pitch to us, but not to buy a book, that's not it, but to say, hey, if you're interested in what we were doing or other things, here's a great book that we put together called Drawdown. If you want to go buy the book, great. You don't have to, because we actually made it all available for free on our website. All the materials there and lots more. So if you're interested in climate solutions, yeah, maybe you can help us by kind of sharing the word about drawdown.org and maybe follow us on Twitter and Facebook and all that stuff. That'd be great. That'd be helpful. But way more important than anything to do with us is what you are doing in your lives. So if I could do two things, I would ask you two. One is do not give up hope in the future. This is the most important thing we can do. Barbara Kingsolver, a wonderful American writer, wrote this once, and I was just struck by it when I read it. She said, here's what I've decided. The very least you can do in your life is figure out what you hope for. What I want is so simple I almost can't say it. Elementary kindness. Enough to eat. Enough to go around. The possibility that kids might one day grow up to be neither the destroyers nor the destroyed. That's about it. So don't give up on hope, and make sure we live for our next generations in a sense of hope and opportunity. And finally, especially for the students in the room, all of you younger people out there, make your dent. We need you. The future isn't written yet. It's up for grabs. Robert Wilson once said, reminds us, the future is up for grabs, and it belongs to any and all who will take the risk and accept the responsibility of consciously creating the future they want, because you can. So with that, I'm going to stop and say thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight, and I'd love to see if there's some Q&A and conversation. I don't know how long we have, but thank you so much for the opportunity to be here tonight.
Six, a little after six. Just,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Tom is graciously and maybe foolishly, so I can run this myself now. How about a couple Q&As? I'd love to start with some of the students, if we don't mind. Sometimes students are a little shy at starting up. No, I just said you're shy, so you're going to not put your hands up. But we can start with anybody, but I'd love it if a couple. Hey, how about you?
Are those economic payoff calculations for the various solutions, present value calculations? How did you arrive at those?
Those are, oh God, we have an economics grad student here or something. You can read thousands of pages of technical information on our website about how those are not economic models of looking at discount rate. They're just looking at just financial cash flow in and out. So very simple-minded, just financial analysis is not a proper like general equilibrium model or how will this perturb the rest of the economy and applying like a discount rate. And that's all the economic buzzwords I know right there. So I can get in touch with people who did a lot of the modeling, but it's actually a pretty simple-minded, almost just financial analysis, like what would you put in, what would come back like immediately. A lot of, for those of you who don't follow economics and stuff like that, there's this idea of like putting everything in terms of the present day value of money because, there's inflation, but also economists sometimes put a discount rate on the future. Like the future isn't as valuable as something today. I just have a fundamental moral disagreement with that, but it's something that's in a lot of economic models. It's a robust assumption we have to do something. But anyway, debatable and fun to think about. So more on that. Yes?
I was just very surprised that the fluorinated gases were very small, but the refrigeration was very high.
Yeah. Well, it's not that small. I mean, it's a pretty big sliver of the atmosphere, and if a single thing you could eliminate, it turns out like none of those solutions were like, oh, that wipes out all of this. Like there's no one solution to electricity that just wipes out the whole electricity sector or food. All the solutions are that's why we needed 100 of them to kind of stack up to taking care of like basically 5 or 6 major sectors. We need 100 tools to do it. And refrigeration is one of the biggest. It isn't necessarily the biggest in terms of the total cumulative impact. It's just in that scenario to get to drawdown, but because we can do it quickly. That's the nice thing about refrigeration. So it depends on the scenario and the time frame. It's not the biggest solution to climate change forever. It's just the one we can get, helps us get to drawdown most quickly. Is like, that's a low-hanging fruit. We can do that with big bangs for the buck right now. Another is methane, by the way, too. I think we have underestimated. One of the things I didn't say about methane is a short-lived gas. It lives in the atmosphere about, 11 years is the residence time of methane. 10 to 20 years, most of it's gone after 20, 30 years. But in the short time of like 20 years, it's about 80 to 90 times more powerful than CO2. So if we can cut methane sources right now dramatically, it might help us buy time for some of the other solutions that are harder to implement. And the ones I worry about the most are transportation and buildings, because they have a long turnover time. The average building doesn't get remodeled every 20 years or so. So doing deep energy retrofits, huge changes in how buildings are heated and cooled, that's going to take a while. And cars, you buy a Tesla today, your brother-in-law's Humvee is still on the road from 15 years ago, okay? There are today 1 billion internal combustion engines. 30 years from now, there'll still be, no matter what, probably 1 billion internal combustion engines, unless we deliberately destroyed a lot of them, because they're just going to be out there for a while. So those long delays, that's what scares me. That's where, long-winded answer, but that's why fluorinated gases, you act now, boom, they're out of the atmosphere, they're short-lived. Same with methane. So sometimes the chemistry works in your favor to, let's get that out quicker. A little more complicated. Yes, ma'am.
I have a degree in environmental studies, and so I've been very discouraged for a long time. But 2 years ago, everything changed when I heard David Johnson talk about mycorrhizal fungi.
Okay.
Because it turns out that if you inoculate half of the fallow land on Earth, there's about 19% of all farmland is fallow any 1 year. Half of that, inoculate that with mycorrhizal fungi. They suck 5 tons an acre of CO2 out of the air. And his calculations, which he comes from a math engineering background, was that it would take about 15 years to get us below 350.
Yeah.
I thought number 10, 11 on your big pie chart,
Yeah,
regenerative agriculture.
Right.
But it just seems to me that the fungi have very bad PR. They could use some help from a positivity type approach like you're using.
Well, I love your enthusiasm around this, and there are people in this room who I know are definitely experts on this who you really want to talk to. I don't think that claim is considered very credible in the scientific community. There might be something to it, but those kind of numbers actually break the laws of physics, what you just said. Same thing with some of the regenerative pasturing systems. Some of the claims are kind of extrapolated from like, hey, I did this over a square meter plot in my lab, and now multiplying by the area of Earth. And you can't quite do that because every place is different. And so I think others can speak to you about that maybe during.
Just so you know that the mycorrhizal fungi have been disappearing from farmland for
Oh, I know.
10,000 years. So
I'm saying there's something to that. I just don't think that,
they have to have living roots to live on. So
Right.
it takes a different kind of farming.
Oh, no, I don't deny the qualitatively, but I'm just saying, that just doing that will not fix climate change in 15 years all by itself. There's just, the math does not
Have you
work.
read his numbers?
Yes, I have, and they break the laws of physics. Same with Alan Savory's, for that matter. They also violate just basic geology. But there's still something to it. So between kind of hyperbolic numbers of like, whoa, that's way off the deep end, and oh, it's nothing, is the real world, which is like, oh yeah, that's one of the pieces of silver buckshot. We should take a real look at that. But I think I want people like at UC Davis who aren't, or other places to like, hey, let's get 5 or 10 different groups to try to verify that and figure out what to do. So, and I'm not one of them, but there are folks, anyway, there are people, I know there are people in this room who could talk to you about that later, so I hope they connect with you. Because I'm sure there's a great idea in there somewhere, but sometimes just be a little bit wary of, anyways, I have the solution with a capital S. They're almost invariably wrong, but there's something there. So I want to collect all those great ideas and make sure they get the press they need, but also the science they need to make sure we got the right number. And I'm not dissing him at all. I'm just saying, I don't know how he came up with that number, because that would be like adding, well, anyway, long story, just it doesn't mathematically quite make sense. But there's something to there. It's cool. Yes?
So I'm from a coastal community
Uh-huh.
that right now is considering farms.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are really concerned about them and don't want them. Which is, I would like to find a way
Yeah.
that they aren't harmful. I think a lot of the issues that they might harm wildlife.
Yeah.
What would you say?
Where is this community, or roughly, tell me
Do you know
exactly.
where Humboldt County?
Yeah, oh, okay. This is being debated off of like Nantucket in Massachusetts recently. Oh, I'm sorry, the question was, there are proposals in Humboldt County to put offshore wind, and even though a lot of really good, well-intentioned folks, they're in a coastal community in Northern California, there's pushback on building offshore wind with concerns, I'm paraphrasing, but about, oh, it's unsightly, oh, it might kill birds, oh, it might do this and do that or whatever. And NIMBYism, ironically by liberals, is often the most discouraging thing about solving climate change. It's like, I live in San Francisco, really liberal city, we supposedly care about the environment, but nobody wants to have more housing, in the city. Like, but it's too expensive, we need more housing. Well, not in my backyard. Like, yeah, but we need more housing, and we need it to be here. We don't want people driving an hour away. We need offshore wind. Oh, but not in my part of the coast. Like, why the hell not? So one thing that helped in Scotland is they actually had town hall meetings where they brought in experts with like kind of big panoramic screens. They could pop up like a tent, and then people kind of put on goggles and like, oh, that's what it would look like. They actually took like, they made like a 3D model of that place and said, yeah, it's that little windmill out in the distance, which you can't even see half the time because of the fog. That's what we're talking about. Like, oh, that's not so bad. And so I think maybe helping people really see what it's like and immersing people in that might be, but I wish I had a silver bullet solution that I don't. But it's ironic sometimes that, there's always pushback on like, everybody thinks it's great as long as it's somewhere else. I actually love windmills. I want them near me. I'd love it. If I could own a place on the ocean, I'll tell you what, you give me a couple miles of shoreline for me to live on, I'd be happy as a clam, and you can put all the windmills you want on it. Good for that. How about a couple more questions, because we're out of time pretty soon, maybe a few more. How about this side of the room? Yeah, in the purple? Yeah.
I really appreciate your grassroots action. Any advice about?
Yeah, so to repeat the question is kind of a question about like grassrootsy kind of action from the base. Let me just say this though, to solve climate change, we can't do it alone, anybody. Whether it's grassroots or Washington top-down policy or just business or just technologists, nobody's going to solve it all. So we strongly believe to implement all those solutions, we're going to need to change policy and business practice and capital and behavior. Sometimes there's tools for all of us. So what can we do at home, like as individuals or in our communities that we affiliate with? Food waste. Why wait for Washington to tell you what to do with your plate? You can do that now. We're talking today about like you guys got rid of cafeteria trays at UC Davis. When Minnesota did that, we found it cut food waste dramatically in all the dorms. Because, you take an 18-year-old, give them a tray and say, all you can eat? Holy cow, and it helped with the freshman 15 thing, remember that? Oh wow, that helped too. So that's good. Big institutions could do all that. So are you a student or employee here, or do you work here? Yeah. So I think, like the power of you as an individual is one thing, but power of you as a communicator and part of a community is even larger. So it's kind of sharing what you know and what you do with others, whether it's in an apartment, a dorm, classrooms, or clubs you belong to. That's really cool. And my friend Catherine Hayos says the best thing we can do about climate change is talk about it. And make people understand. And I'd say talk about the solutions, saying, hey, we're not doomed. We can do this, and the solutions, a lot of them are good for us, or could be, if we're smart. So that's the most important thing I think we can do. But we also do need changes in policy, so I would demand of your elected officials, like an answer to the question, so what do you think about climate change and what we can do about it? On any party they might happen to belong to, who cares? And don't forget local, because a lot of decision-making about climate change is not done in Washington. The Public Utilities Commission, your transportation board, the zoning board, who decides where the buses go. That's climate change solutions, folks. It's like the zoning board, where the apartments go, whether the windmills get in or not. That's not Washington. Don't wait for Washington. They're not doing anything, but you can. California, I mean, gosh, Gavin Newsom and Jerry Brown together, don't you love this if California were a country kind of statistics, but, because I think we should be. Don't you think that'd be great? No. We got UC Davis. What else do we need? We got everything. We got wine. We got food. It's great. And we don't need a military, right? If the rest of the U.S. wants to invade, we just turn off their maps. Or we could just say, we're turning off your Netflix unless you meet our demands. Like, okay. Game of Thrones, forget it. You're not getting it. Okay. But anyway, so my point was Jerry Brown, he thought he was signing SB 100, which is to make a bill that was going to establish California to say we would have 100% carbon-free electricity in California by 2045. He signed that, and it is now law. But that's only 15% of our emissions. What he did is kind of sneaky. The same day as he signed an executive order, which is not legally binding, future governors could change it, but it committed the governor's office to saying the California economy had to be completely carbon neutral by 2045. And we're the 5th largest economy on the planet. So that's a big deal. That's a bigger thing than Sweden did, and we're a lot bigger. And if you take California, New York City, and Boston, that's half of the US economy. Those 3 places right there. Like, hello, Michael Bloomberg and Jerry Brown are leading us on climate change, and not Donald Trump at the moment. So, okay, find leadership where it exists, and we'll see where it goes. How about 1 or 2 more in terms of time? Are we okay for that? Maybe 2 more questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Gentleman in the back? Yeah.
How do you feel about the Green New Deal? What are your hopes and criticisms?
Of the what?
About the Green New Deal.
Okay, so a question about the Green New Deal. I'll be fair. I'll say some good things and some things I'm concerned about. On the positive side, I like that it's opening I like that, wow, politicians are finally paying attention to climate change. Among Democratic voters who are likely to vote in primaries, is the #1 issue affecting them today. Tomorrow it might be, trade war with China, who knows? I don't know, but it's up there. That's amazing. So it's opening the conversation, and it's being very bold. The aspirations of the language, the details are totally absent. But the goals and aspirations are the highest, you've probably seen in this country before. So it's kind of shifting that, what we call the Overton window, where we talk about where policy can go. We're like, whoa, we're going to have really big, that's great. If I were a cynic, I'd say you can't solve climate change if it depends on Democrats or Republicans or any one party always winning your elections. We're talking about 30 years of work here. If your plan depends on Democrats winning every election for the next 30 years, I got news for you. Ain't gonna happen. Half the time the other guys win. So I'm worried about, is it really to solve climate change, or if I were a cynic, I might say this might be a wedge issue to help Democrats get elected in 2020. It might activate our base in the Democratic Party or the base of the Democratic Party. I don't know. If I were a political operative and a cynic, I'd say, what would get young people to vote? Climate change, maybe. Then they're probably not going to vote for the GOP right now. I hope I'm wrong about that. I don't know, so I like it, but part of me is a little bit cynical because it's politicians in Washington, and I don't trust them very much. So I don't know. I'd like to believe it's the good stuff, and we'll work with it, but be wary of, maybe there's an ulterior motive of like, hey, this will get them out to vote. Just because, what speaks to the base of the GOP? Gun control, or, guns, abortion, things like this. And yet, nothing, Obama didn't take our guns, but he yelled, the GOP yelled for years that he would. Didn't happen. And it got their voters out. I kind of wonder if this is what's going on. And there's no way any legislation, the Green New Deal is going to get to be law until 2022, 2024 at the earliest. Even if Democrats take the White House, you got the Senate. To get a filibuster-proof majority of Democrats in the Senate will take at least 1 or 2 more cycles. So I just don't know what's going to happen. In the meantime, the planet's warming. So I want to get to work. So I like it. I'm a little wary of it, but I don't want to put all my eggs in that basket. I'd like to see local and state action while we're waiting for Washington too. Hopefully it'll happen. I want it to be bipartisan because if it's going to be a long-term enduring issue, Republicans have to be on board. George H.W. Bush, frankly, was the best climate president we ever had. A lot of people don't believe that, but he was. Richard Nixon was probably one of the best environmental presidents we've ever had. So, Republicans used to own this issue too. It's only a recent kind of shifting of the bases of these two parties that have made this polarized. It doesn't need to be. Everybody loves their kids. We can bring it back together again. That's one thing I would do. So reach out to Republicans, make them own this issue too. Because we all live on the same planet. But that's just me. I don't know. Gentleman in front, and then why don't we wrap up in this last question, if
Many
that's
who
okay.
are resisting say it's going to cost too much to wreck the economy. So how do you
Because it's not. Almost all of this is like just innovation. Like these are things that we can do. Like a lot of climate change is happening. The question is, would this wreck the economy? Would this be bad for us? Will it cost too much? Not if we're smart about it. Because we're talking about like, nobody here is saying, well not for me anyway, saying let's stop having electricity. Let's not have mobility. Let's not eat food. We're like, yeah, of course we do. We're just going to make it better. Instead of burning ancient rocks and gases, to make a car go around. You and I don't benefit from an internal combustion engine. We benefit from having a car that goes where we want to go. So a battery-powered car, great. They're even better. They cost less to operate. They're really going to be inexpensive in the future. They're going to be cheaper than internal combustion cars within 3 years at the rate batteries are falling. That's incredible. Electricity, why do you benefit from burning coal? Nobody does unless you're in the coal industry directly. The rest of us don't. So it's just the nature of technological change. We're going to see, these things, replaced so much other technology, and they do it better. They do some other things that are pretty weird, but, So I'm actually kind of an optimist here, saying I think we can actually solve a lot of this. And food waste, nobody benefits from this. So a big chunk of solving climate change is stop doing things that are kind of dumb in the first place, replace things with better technologies, and some of it will be uncomfortable and hard. That might come down the pike, but there's a lot of low-hanging, easy fruit to pick right now, and we haven't picked even a beginning of that, and we have so much to do. So I think this would be a net huge job creator and win for the economy if we do it right and do it smart. And why not? Okay, well, great. Thank you so much for your time.
So I want to thank John. I am going to use that no silver bullets, but silver buckshot. I like that very much. Thanks for a great talk. How many people are feeling better after John's talk than you felt before? Look at the show of hands. Yeah, great. And thank you, Rachel. Where's Rachel's in the back? Yes. Thank you, Rachel. So no pressure, Rachel, but John did identify that leadership is key to doing all this. So you've now been bestowed with a leadership award. I'm joking with Rachel, but it's part of the vision of the Bradford and the Rominger families that we need a new kind of leadership, which I think completely aligned with what John was saying. And just to reiterate, this award is meant to inspire future leaders of the sustainable food movement to continue what they're doing to change food systems for the better. So we got the list of 100 things. A bunch of them are about food and agriculture. I want to thank everybody who's here. The selection committee that worked with me on the obvious choice of Rachel Long. We do committees for everything here at UC Davis. And I also want to mention the ASI staff who worked so hard to make this such a success. So Dina, Carissa, the whole team behind the scenes, they make it look really easy. All I have to do is show up, but they're the ones who really do the hard work. I want to thank our co-sponsors. I'm really pleased with this extensive collaboration from other directors here at UC Davis. And I especially want to thank the families that had the vision to create this award. And my hope is that you feel that this is a suitable recognition and the legacy of Eric and Charlie is continuing and strong here. So thank you very much. We'll see you all in a year.